Chapter 3: Trial of the Forgotten. Layla, the purple-eyed girl, stood facing off to her brother, Enoch. She stood over me with Blackbeard and Cain backing her up. Enoch laughed. How pitiful. Two mortals and a weak goddess dare to stand up to us. We should make an example of you all. Enoch's eyes narrowed at Layla and my body. Especially you two. You, Layla, for betraying our laws by bringing mortals into our kingdom. And you, outsider, for daring to raise your hands to lay harm on your superiors. Layla shouted, "Look closer at him, Brother Enoch. He is our lord." But something happened to him. Brother Octane attacked him. Enoch fell silent, gazing upon me. "If what you say is true, then where is my brother now?" I noticed the outsider has his sword. Cain stepped forward and said, "Your brother, you say? You're another god of Kahira. The only thing left of your brother is his head." Enoch surged forward and grabbed Cain by the neck. "Who are you to speak to me in such a manner?" Blackbeard stepped forward. His beard hairs burst into flames. The demonic power flowed from him. His eyes blazed black with unholy fire. "Brother Enoch, I see you still haven't changed. I see I am going to have to hurt you again." Blackbeard laughed malevolently. A spark fell from the flames of Blackbeard's hair. The spark landed on my chest and combusted. Blackbeard grinned evilly at Enoch. "It seems you're in trouble, Enoch. You awoke the monster in me, but what about him?" Blackbeard jerked his thumb behind. I stood up and roared. With the sword of Octane in hand, my form had changed drastically. The fire subsided, revealing my lion form had changed to that of a demonic being. Charred horns curled from my forehead, ending in jagged, serrated spikes. Large wings spanned from my shoulders. I took a step forward into Enoch's line of sight. He sank to his knees and croaked, "The universe is at its end. The fall of Kahira is nigh." I crouched down and peered at Enoch. "You're pathetic. At the first sight of danger, you run? How cowardly." I turned in the direction of Layla. Was this the brother that can help? Layla glared at me, purple eyes flashing darkly. "I don't wish to converse with you when you're in that form. The demons are the sole reason we suffer. To take that form is an insult." I calmed my rage and was human once again. I strode up to Enoch and punched him across the face. His nose popped and gold blood trickled down his chin. The air seemed to thicken and dread gripped our hearts. Layla's face had lost its color. "The king is here." You seem to have caught his undivided attention, a feat in itself. Somewhere above us a balcony door crashed open and a haughty man briskly strode out. His voice couldn't hide his disdain. "Why are there mortals skulking around in my palace?" He peered at us for what seemed like an age. When he finally spoke, it was to Layla. "Sister Layla, it is my understanding that you allowed such a vile race into our domain. For that you will be punished. Bring up the human child. The other two creatures can stay there. Brother Enoch, you come as well, after you've cleaned yourself up, that is." Layla glanced at me and motioned for me to follow. The inside of the palace was extraordinary. It was a living forest. The insects and birds buzzed and whizzed overhead. A rattle startled me. Looking down, noticing a snake staring at me with pure malice. I looked behind me to speak to Layla, but she was gone. I looked back at the snake, which had multiplied. One snake bared long fangs and hissed, "When will you humans stop coming? Only one human is allowed here, and you can't be him." I felt a hand grab me and pull me away. I looked back and saw Layla's face. I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't let go. She snapped irritably, "Stay close, for now everything wishes you harm. Only humans with the king's permission are allowed to freely wander." She led me up a flight of stairs and let go of my arm in front of a set of gold-encrusted doors. Two of the faceless warriors stood guarding the door. They stepped to the side, granting passage. Layla whispered in my ear, "Make sure to bow to the king. He might look favorably on you." I darted a look at Layla. "I'm not bowing to him. If the king isn't going to show some respect, then he won't get mine in turn." The king's voice boomed from beyond the door, a cold harshness I've not heard before. Stop wasting my time, child. Come from behind the door and speak. Quickly now. I grasped the doorknob and threw open the door. The king glared at me from across the room. I felt the distinct feeling of dread fall over the room. The king slowly rose from his throne, skeletal hand resting on his blade. With each footfall, the sense of dread grew stronger. Finally, the king snapped, "Sister Layla, for the crime of allowing mortals into the sacred homeland of our ancestors, which is an unforgivable act against our people, your sentence is execution." A vicious smile curled over the king's shallow face. Dark eyes glittered. "Now, mortal, we come to you. For the crime of trespassing onto ground that doesn't belong to you and for the assault of a superior being, your sentence is execution." The king snapped his fingers and a group of the silent guard slowly advanced towards Layla. I glared at the king and leaped forward. I grabbed Layla and threw her at the door. Just as the doors locked, I smiled at Layla. I could see the horror on her face, and I shook my head. The guards sprang forward in unison and attacked. I closed my eyes and I began to feel the temperature begin to rise. The air combusted, destroying half the room. I took an earth-shaking step forward. I peered closely at my foe. His eyes appeared startled. My horns were mere inches from the king's face. The king screamed, "Attack him." I glanced lazily at the guards surrounding me, and noticed none made any movement to apprehend me. I turned my gaze back to the king. "Lord Osriel, the command over your army is still pathetic, I see. But to pit your pets against my champion is futile. That is a war you cannot win. But while we're here, my dear child, I have a request. Give me your eyes, and I won't pulverize your palace." Osriel stared at me. Ammon, is that you? Is this puny mortal really your champion?" And my eyes. "Never." Osriel grabbed his staff and struck the earth. A strange pool appeared at Osriel's feet, and undead soldiers clambered out groaning. "Souls of the damned, protect me with your lives." The horde of undead shuffled toward me, weapons drawn. I inhaled deeply and exhaled a gout of fire, burning the undead to cinders. I began to advance onto Osriel, hatred burning in my eyes. I called out, "Guards, close the portal immediately. And you, Osriel, did I not make my request clear?" I closed my eyes briefly, then fixed my gaze upon the king. "Give me your eyes, Osriel, and live your existence in exile." I grabbed the king by the throat, but my hands went through him. I heard laughter behind me. A large man adorned in darkness stood with Enoch by his side. The large man stepped forward holding something in his hand. My eyes focused on red hair, disheveled, and in the other, two familiar faces. I glared at the man and roared, "What did you do to them?" "I will." The man threw his captives to the floor and held up his hand. "When I talk, you shall listen. It seems you managed to hold your own against my, how should I put it? Yes. My stand-in, if you will. I'm impressed, but the matter of your charges still stands. However, since you put on a wonderful show, I am willing to negotiate. The choices are: I give you all a public execution, you fight in the pits alone against opponents of my choosing, or you fight all the family and die miserably. Which option do you choose, mortal?" I unsheathed my claws to attack when a cool wind filled the room. A brilliant white light burst from Cain's body. Blinded, I covered my eyes. Slowly the light faded, and before us stood an angel. Wings spanned his back, and his gown seemed to be made of light itself. The angel raised his head and surveyed the room. His voice, soft yet commanding. "All in this room are to lay down your arms and halt your aggression. This is not a time for war among allies, nay, a war between family. I understand it's a lot to take in, but..." The large man drew his weapon and slashed at the angel. A look of pure rage split the angel's features into a mask of something horrific. Twin blades materialized in the angel's hands. Sparks flashed as metal clashed with metal. The two beings stood before me were on par with each other. Who I chose to back from here felt like a test. As the two beings went to strike each other, I sprang forward and dived between their blades, grabbed Blackbeard and Layla and slid them out of harm's way. I surged into the air and gazed at the two raging monsters below. I plunged back down and brought my armor-clad paw down onto their heads. The two beings turned their gaze onto me and paused. A strange, unholy power seemed to flow around me. Boughs of pain seared through my body, stinging my bones. Booming laughter echoed, followed by a lazy voice. How much will you suffer, mortal, before you bend to me? How much pain are you willing to endure before you finally realize that I am the only master you serve? Are these arrogant, pig-headed weaklings really worth all this bother? I screamed as my blood boiled and my skin began to bubble. The angel rushed over to me and placed his hands upon my head and chest. He was trying to heal me, but whatever had its grip on me was powerful. My body twisted as another wave of pain washed over me. Blood bubbled over my lips and spattered the earth, burning holes in the ground. The angel glanced over to the man adorned in darkness. Help me cleanse this child of corruption. Help our race win even this small battle. The large man grunted and slowly sheathed his battle axe and joined the angel in meditation. I could still feel my blood boiling inside me. Twisted images flashed in my mind. The images foretold the age of the demon clan drawing near. An unstoppable force of demon and undead sweeping the land in its cold, bitter embrace. The battle between gods and demons will achieve the crowning of the demon clan and the fall of the angelic. I sat bolt upright and grabbed the angel by the shoulders, roaring in panic. My claws sank deeper into his shoulders. Through the veil of rage and agony, I locked emerald eyes onto the piercing blue of the angel's. As my rage subsided, so did my boiling blood. The angel smiled as I blinked several times, slightly dizzy. I coughed and threw up gold blood. I stared at the angel for a few seconds before asking, "What happened?" "Who are you?" The angel stood up holding his shoulder. "My name is Archangel Gabriel. You are very lucky to be alive, child. To have such an encounter with Ammon would normally be fatal. It seems he sees in you that which we would in one of our own champions. I can see why the Lord of Darkness would want you for his own. With power like yours, you would be a valuable asset to the Demon Lord and an even greater threat to him if you joined us." I pulled myself to my feet and met the angel's gaze. "You expect me to side with beings who have no regard for my life or the life of one of their own. Your king was seconds away from killing his sister in cold blood." Archangel Gabriel held up his hand and silenced me. "Child, listen and listen well. The visions you have been receiving are not your imagination. The realm of the dead is almost upon us. The Lord of the Dead is coming to wage war upon this land and the next. Ammon will destroy this world and the one below to make claim to the throne. If Ammon takes the throne, this land will be plunged into chaos. That is why we need a champion. Every 500 years a new champion is selected to be the protector of the realms. So, the responsibility of protecting the kingdoms falls to you. The stars chose you to lead the charge on the land of the dead." I shook my head and took a step back. My foot slipped on loose stone and I fell back. I tried to regain my footing and failed. I plunged down through the bank of clouds. The faster I fell, the slower I seemed to fall. I glanced around and saw the endless expanse of sky stretching out as far as the eye could see. A bright light appeared in front of me and began to pulsate. A strange, distorted voice beckoned to me. "Child, I understand our brother is on the roam. Archangel Gabriel. You must tell him that Father Ammon is aiming to try and bring all the armors together to create his own champion. If he succeeds in doing this, then the world may well just give up. None will survive should he succeed. Tell Gabriel that Ursula said so. Please, outsider, do this for us." I slowly came to whilst still falling. I looked down and saw the ground racing to meet me. My heart leaped into my mouth and I tried to call out, but my voice was snatched away by the howling wind. Suddenly, I felt myself quickly coming to a halt. I craned my neck and looked up to see Gabriel flapping his wings with all his might. I concentrated and combusted, wings erupted from my back and I began to flap. Before long I had grasped how to fly. I laughed gleefully. Then I remembered what the disembodied voice had told me. Gabriel, don't call me crazy, but I spoke to someone who called themselves Ursula. She said something about her father wants to bring all the artifacts together to create his own champion. Gabriel stopped in mid-flight and stared hard at me. His hand had fell to his swords. His eyes flashed black as he chose his next few words carefully. You're telling me, my sister, who has been dead for as long as I can remember, spoke to you just now, and said my father wishes to make his own champion. I felt the power of a cursed monster awakening above me. I had felt this kind of power before. The first time I had met Blackbeard. The same devastating evil that washed over him then was 10 times as powerful now. I turned tail on Gabriel and rocketed up. I heard Blackbeard rage. Where is Enadin? If either of you puny gods have touched a hair on his head, I swear by the glowing halo of God I will wreak havoc upon your kingdom. I will leave your homeland in burning ruins. I surged through the hole in the palace and landed in front of Blackbeard. Blackbeard sank to his knees and grasped my legs. Enadin, I don't like this place. Can we burn it, please? There's something strange going on here. I can feel it. The evil in me is getting restless. I don't want it to be free. I grabbed Blackbeard by the shoulder. I know who is behind this. The only trouble is, at the minute we are too weak to face him. We need to be stronger if we want to face him. And we need the help of the gods. Gabriel raced through the hole and landed softly. His expression was unreadable, but his voice betrayed him. I could hear the underlying rage. Enadin, if what you said was true, then we need to prepare now. You and your allies need to train. You need to be stronger than you are. You may have the abilities of our chosen champion, but you still need the knowledge of one of us if you wish to stand any hope. Osriel, I want you to train the boy and Enoch. You train the brute. I'm going to summon the others here. I stood in some kind of arena. Gates stared at me from every direction. Osriel's voice boomed overhead. From now, child, you will do what I say when I say. Do you understand? If I tell you to stand still in the lake of fire, you will do it. His voice turned cold and unforgiving, because if you don't, I can give you any punishment. The king's cackle made my blood run cold, and the hairs on my arms stand on end. I heard the rusty scream as corrugated iron scraped corrugated iron somewhere behind me and whirled around just in time to roll out of the way of a giant's club. The giant roared loudly and charged forward. I leaped out of the way as the giant stomped the floor where I had been stood. I glared up at Osriel and I could feel my blood boil. Flames burst around me and I glared at the giant. Osriel laughed as the giant charged yet again. His laughter was cut short when the giant exploded from the inside. Entrails showered the air and squelched on the ground. Osriel hit another button and this time 2 giants ambled forward. I drew my sword and slashed forward. A tendril of pure flame seared forward, scorching the earth. I glared at the giants who stared at me. I spoke to them as best as I could. Giants, I am not your enemy. I didn't trap you here against your will. That man up there is the reason you're here. The giants looked at each other and then charged forward. I raised my sword and slashed twice. The giants toppled as I cut off their legs. They tried to get back up, so I grabbed both giants by the hair and slowly pulled. With a wet squelch I pulled off their heads and threw the heads to the floor. I turned behind me when I heard the sound of breaking bricks. I slowly entered the dungeon and saw the breaking wall at the back. I reeled back when the wave of rotting flesh hit my nose. I gagged and pushed on. Through streaming eyes, I saw hands pushing their way through the wall. A forceful scream pushed me back a few paces. I summoned a ball of fire in my hand and blasted the wall away. I saw a long passageway winding off. Following the passage, the smell of rotting flesh grew stronger and stronger, then dissipated in a large cavern. The hands were gone, and it seemed the cavern was empty. I was just about to leave when I heard something at the far end of the cavern. I drew my sword and slowly advanced, and to my amazement I saw it was Blackbeard. I went to shout him, but I noticed something was off. A strange black smoke seeped from Blackbeard. He sprang at me and attacked. I dodged out of the way in time to see Blackbeard's blade sink deep into the stone floor. The creature threw back its head and screeched loudly. I went to cover my ears, but the monster used that moment to attack. I held up my hand, and a plume of fire burst from my hand. Through the glow of the fire, I caught a glimpse of the creature. Its flesh was disintegrating rapidly by the second, eyes rolling wildly in their sockets. The smell of rotting flesh and decaying limbs filled the air around me. The creature reeled, clutching its head in agony. I looked closely to see its eyes had started to melt. I turned my gaze onto Osriel, who had a sick smile on his face, his hands resting on his cane. The Lord of the Dead raised his hand in the creature's direction, and slowly but surely the monster's flesh was already knitting itself together. Its eyes stopped rolling in their sockets and came to a halt, staring at me. Osriel's voice boomed loudly. "Mortal, hurry up and kill the creature. I have other business to attend to. If I'm late for my meeting, then you will pay the price." My scream cut the Lord of the Dead's sentence short and rang through the kingdom of the gods. The creature had summoned a few minions from the land of the dead. 2 minions had grabbed my arms and wrenched them behind my back. The Blackbeard shade strode forward and thrust his sword deep into my shoulder. I screamed in pain as my blood began to bubble unpleasantly. 2 minions who had my arms laughed menacingly. The shade of Blackbeard pointed to me, then pointed to chains hung high above the cavern. I was hauled off by the creatures deeper into the cave. Deeper and deeper. The air became cold and dank, reeking of old water and rust. The deeper I was taken, the more creature were beginning to follow behind. Before long there was an army of the creatures screeching in fury. Chains were roughly placed around my limbs and tightened mercilessly. The chains ripped through my skin as I was pulled higher and higher. One of the jailers carried a gold thorn whip which cracked just above my head. I raised my head to gaze at my jailer. A chittering voice rose from the creature, getting louder and louder. My eyes flashed emerald in the darkness. I could hear my heartbeat pounding inside my chest, getting faster. Sweat beaded my forehead. I howled as my spine began to stretch. My howl of pain turned into a roar of pure fury. My wings strained against the chains. The chains screamed in protest, then shattered. My wings beat the air, keeping me aloft. I surveyed the ground before me, then plunged. I swooped towards the shade of Blackbeard. The shade locked eyes with me and drew its weapon. Its features cracked into what I realized to be a smile. The shade took a few steps back, allowing me the room to land. I landed softly, then straightened. My lips peeled back to show my serrated teeth. I licked my lips and exhaled. A gout of fire burst from my throat. The shade seemed to melt into the floor, then appeared behind me. My tail lashed out and wrapped around the shade. I leaped forward and slashed with my claws. The shade parried my attack with its weapon, then delivered an attack of its own. The shade's sword connected with one of my horns, and instead of it slicing through, the sword seemed to fade through my horn, and when it came through the other end, my horn fell to the earth with a heavy thud. The shade stepped back and sheathed its weapon and began to walk away. I grabbed my horn and held it to my head. My skin felt the horn and began to stitch itself back together. I drew the sword of Octane Kahira, and it seemed my opponent sensed the power of the sword as its steps began to falter. Its walk came to a shuffle, then to a stop. The shade slowly turned, and I saw that the shade's flesh was beginning to disintegrate once again. The sword of Octane Kahira seemed to grow the more the shade's skin melted. The shade screamed in pain, the shrieks drawing the attention of more shades. I turned to see a mass of shades rushing forward, howling and shrieking. I held up the sword of Octane Kahira, and to my amazement the shades shrank back. The other shades began to scream in pain as my sword began to feed off of them. The shade of Blackbeard stepped forward and sheathed its blade. I slowly sheathed mine, and then the shade spoke. Its voice seemed to be everywhere in the darkness. I know who you are, boy. You are one of the last remaining members of the Kahira blood. It was a man of Kahira that cursed us to undeath. I have taken this form because you are acquainted with it. I felt that you had compassion inside you, even in the form you have now. I only attacked you because I wanted to see if you can control your power. I now have my answer. You can't control it. But is that because of the underlying rage you have, or is it from the blood of the Reaper of Man? I held my hand up. I can control my power, Shade. Let's finish our battle before you make your assumptions. The shade dissolved into the darkness of the cave. I glanced around to see the shades had dissolved into nothingness. My footfalls sounded crunched on rocks, shattering them. My tail lashed out, angrily whipping to and fro. I felt the darkness shift just behind me. I leaped back and whirled around. I rocketed up as high as the cavern would let me, then I swung around and sliced through the air like a knife through butter, inhaling deeply. I could feel the heat of fire roaring through my body. Second later, a blast of molten flames lit the interior of the cavern. The shades shrieked wildly as the flames tore through their bodies. The screams of agony sent shivers down my spine. I looked around and saw shades running around trying to douse the flames that ravaged their bodies. I felt a sharp pain in my back through to my chest. I looked down to see the blade of a great sword plunged through my chest. I turned and saw the shade of Blackbeard. His face something out of a horror film. Eyes spinning wildly in his head as his skin began to disintegrate. I slowly pulled the sword from my chest and threw it to the floor with a clatter. As the shade reached for his weapon, I gripped his arm in my armor-clad claws. My eyes burned deep into his. My horns were centimeters from his face. I lifted him up to my level and opened my mouth. My teeth crashed closed, tearing off the shade's head. I heard Osriel's voice say, "I'm impressed. You managed to dispatch a whole army of shadow people. I've been trying to clear that problem up for a long time." The earth shook with each step I took. I didn't have to look to tell that I was becoming more monster than champion. My claws scratched deep furrows into the cave walls, my tail bringing boulders crashing from the ceiling. I crawled out of the cave, then stood to my full height. I stared Lord Osriel deep into his eyes. He blinked and I materialized behind him. My hand shot out and I grabbed his hair, wrenching back. With my free hand I plucked out one of his eyes with a menacing smile and a chilling laugh. As I raised Osriel's eye to my face, the middle of my forehead opened slightly and the eye settled in place. The eye blinked a few times and slowly turned red, shining in the fast-approaching night. I turned 3 blazing eyes onto the shivering form of Lord Osriel. "You're lucky that I only needed the one eye. I could have made you suffer more than you could believe." Osriel raised his staff weakly and tried to create a portal. I materialized before him and ripped his staff out of his hands. With a sharp crack, the sturdy staff snapped in two. A strange goo seeped off the staff and pooled onto the floor. I bent down curiously to inspect the strange substance. As I bent down, the goo leaped and landed on my exposed flesh. I went to grab it, but the goo was already oozing into my body. I watched in fascination as the goo made its way up my arm and then burrowed deep inside my body. I raised my hand slightly and saw a strange puddle appearing on the floor. Skeletal fingers forced their way through, only to lose their fingers when I closed the portal. My new eye sprang open, and it was as if everything was on a megaphone. I heard voiced from the far end of the palace, "Don't you think that the boy's training has gone on long enough? We left a man fascinated with torture with our so-called champion." Another voice grunted unhappily, "Can someone just remind me why we have a mortal here to do a god's job? What is it that mortal has that we don't?" I stormed forward, charging down the pristine halls. Charging past the wild beasts roaming palace. I was closing in fast on the voices. I was just about to barrel in when a voice called my name. I could smell the dead worms and sweat-caked clothes. I grunted, Blackbeard, leave while you still can. I won't ask again. The same goes for the angel. Leave here and don't look back. Blackbeard laughed lightly. Come Enadin. Don't be like that. That. I'm sure the Lord of the Dead didn't hurt you too much. Not for a champion of. I turned slowly and faced Blackbeard. I roared in fury, the echoes shaking the heavens. Tell me, Teach. Does this look like the face of a god to you? You have seen many gods, have you not? Does this face spell safety and salvation to you? One monster to another. You tell me. My roars had drawn the attention of the occupants of the room. The door screamed open and Brother Enoch and a new face greeted us. I threw the unconscious body of Lord Osriel at the feet of his brothers. The gods stared back at me in horror, mouths agape at the bleeding body of their sibling. Osriel began to stir. No sooner had he regained consciousness, screams racked his body. I raised my hooved foot above the god's head and was about to finish the job when the commanding aura of the angel waltzed in, wings flapping wildly behind him. His gaze fell onto me and his face hardened. My horns gleamed in the moonlight, eyes glowing crimson. The angel crouched next to Osriel and slowly began to heal him. Somewhere behind me I heard the sound of a portal gushing into life. I drew the blade of Octane Kahira and turned to face the judgment of the gods. The anticipated attack didn't come. Instead, the gods stalked past me like they didn't see me. I raised my hand to the heavens and an unholy crack of lightning flashed down through the roof, sending sparks flying across the floor. The gods looked at me, then at each other. Since when were we recruiting demons into our ranks? I thought that was a no-go. Angel Gabriel shook his head. The beast you see before you is our chosen champion. But Octane infected him with evil. And to top it off, Ammon wants the same champion as us. For the exact same reason as our own. A small god shuffled forward and began peering at me from all different angles. Suddenly the small god bleated. The champion has found the first relic. A long gnarled finger poked the middle of my forehead. My limbs seemed to have grown a mind of their own as my arms grabbed the small god by the hair and tossed him into the corner of the room. I growled, touch me again, Pixie, and I'll break every bone in your body.